guys, it's Sam. Welcome back to Vlogmas. Today we're going to be talking about the 5 most underrated books that I read in 2023. Technically, there's still a few books that I'm reading before the end of the year, but I don't know if any of those will fall into like most underrated, most underhyped. So we're doing things a little early, even though it's against my nature. And these are books that, at least on my side of the bookish internet, Book Talk and BookTube primarily, I have not seen a lot of people talk about these. A few of these, One of these in particular has like a few champions of them, but I would still say they were largely underrated. So let's get into it. First is Thistle Foot by Gemma Rose Nethercott. You're going to hear me talking about this book all of the time in all of my wrap-ups and like favorites of the year and stuff, because spoiler alert, this is one of my favorite books of the year. But the fact that this is not talked about more, I get that there's something about it that makes it a little bit hard to recommend, generally speaking, if you're just giving like a blanket recommendation, because there's some heavy topics. There's themes of like anti-Semitism and trauma and like some of the historical things around anti-Semitism and the way like even like domestic terror and things like that that are heavy. In addition to all of that, it also explores very interesting magic that is almost like smaller in scale. This is not necessarily an epic scoped book. It very much follows certain characters' lives and is very like sort of intimate character study in a lot of ways. It has a sentient house. It talks about the Baba Yaga myth. It explores sibling dynamics and families that are like theatrical families and identity and queerness and like a bunch of stuff. The writing quality is excellent. Like, I just think that this is a book that, generally speaking, if you were to make a blanket statement about it, there is something in here that everyone probably could like, because there's a lot of things explored really well. So yeah, this book, more people should be reading it. Also, as I mentioned in my review of this, which I did recently, if more people read it, maybe we'll get special editions of it, because apparently the special edition creators only do it for books that are super, super hyped. And so we have 18 editions of like every Sarah J. Maas book, when really I just want one more of these. I want a beautiful edition. So anyway, Thistle Foot. Then another book I've been talking about a lot in all these wrap-ups, even though I read it at the beginning of the year. My first book that I read this year. Locklands by Robert Jackson Bennett. The Foundry Size series by Robert Jackson Bennett. This series is so underrated, and I'm sick of yelling at y'all to read it. It's just like unlike anything that I have read before. It's one of the books that, like, I read a lot of pretty decent books this year, but I will say not a lot of them stick out as being fantastic in the way that this does and that this series does. This series is something so interesting. As I've mentioned before, it takes almost elements that would usually be sci-fi and makes them fantasy. Like, it makes tech into fantasy. Like, it's so cool in a way that I've never seen anything else do. It has everything. It has little found families. It has like eccentric mentors. It has sapphic relationships. It explores so much. It's so good. There's some like religious trauma pieces. It's really good. So yeah, this series, highly underrated. I have heard not enough people talk about even just Foundry Side, which is book 1, let alone the finale Locklands. Like, this is a series that I definitely want to reread. Banks is making a mess of my desk. Thank you, buddy. All just to get over here. You know, you could have jumped on my lap from the floor. He doesn't realize that he could jump on my lap from the floor. He's taken up getting onto the desk and then coming down to my lap when he could just jump up from here. Cats. But anyway, that's a series that I won't stop talking about because highly underrated. Then we have Wild and Wicked Things by Francesca May. This is a Great Gatsby-esque fantasy story. There are parts of it that feel like a retelling, and then it sort of diverges and becomes its own unique thing. But it has, again, make it sapphic and make it dark and make it about magic and witches. And so instead of, you know, alcohol and like the prohibition, magic is like fairly outlawed and considered very dangerous for a number of reasons. This is one of those stories where magic comes with a price. We have, again, a Gatsby-esque storyline at the beginning that then diverges. We have a woman who doesn't know a lot about her family history and her ties to magic. So this was delightful and lovely. And again, something that I think a lot of people would enjoy. A lot of people like, you know, takes on classic lit. This has witches. I think the magic and alcohol prohibition like metaphor is something that's pretty commonly used, but I tend to like that theme exploration. And yeah, this was very good. It's something that I didn't expect because no one had talked about this. So when I read it, I had gotten this, as an ARC, and it came out in March of 2022. And then I had the ARC before that. No one has talked about this. I've heard, or a few people have talked about it at least. So yeah, this is great. More people should read it. Then from another series that was on my list last year, or the first book last year, but the second book, Prime Deceptions by Valerie Valdez. As I mentioned when I talked about this last year, when I've talked about this series in general, this is a series heavily inspired by the game Mass Effect. I'm wearing a Mass Effect sweater because basically every video I've filmed for Vlogmas I've been wearing this sweater because I've filmed on different days and bulk filmed. So it's essentially the sweater the entire time. But this has a lot of elements of Mass Effect if you like that, but even if you are not familiar with the game, it's not like it's a complete retelling or fanfic of it. But this second book, the second installment, while the first book is a lot more, like it's very, very fast paced and a lot of like, the main character making a lot of mistakes and stuff. This is more of a character exploration because the main character has to confront something about her past where like she really messed up. And so she has to go back to this like area in which that all happened. So continued greatness. I love the relationship here. There's an alien romance. It's not smutty. Not everything has to be smutty. So yeah, highly enjoyed this. This series continues to be underrated. I know sci-fi in general tends to be underrated. More people should read it. And finally, another sci-fi book, The Last Watch by J.S. Dews. I almost included Some Desperate Glory by Emily Tesh, but I think that is slightly more hyped within the sci-fi realm. This I don't hear talked about nearly at all. Like I think I've heard like maybe 2 people recommend it. Those people talk very highly of it. But this is a sci-fi story that is following a cast of sort of like outcast characters that were sent to the fringes of the universe for reasons. And they have to just basically watch what is called the divide, which is like the edge of the universe. And then it starts kind of like collapsing. And so they're having to figure out what is going on. So you primarily are following 2 main characters. One is like the commander of this area. And she has very interesting dynamics with everybody. There's sort of like an exiled prince type character, but instead of him really seeming like royalty, he's more of like a scientist type character. And they're both very fun. This is very fast-paced, intense, space opera-y type sci-fi. And apparently there's going to be a trilogy. There's 2 books out. I thought it was just going to be a duology. Apparently it's going to be a trilogy. I've only read this first book, but again, if you are into fun, fast-paced sci-fi with interesting characters, this is good. So those are the 5 books that I read this year that I think are the most underrated. Comment below, let me know about some underrated reads that you've read this year. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye.